At Easter brunch, I heard my daughter-in-law tell the entire table she only invited me because my son was too weak to cut me off. I was standing just behind the frosted glass divider at Magnolia House, a bright little restaurant near the waterfront in Charleston, holding a white bakery box tied with yellow ribbon. Inside was the lemon pound cake I had baked that morning, the same cake my late husband Henry used to say tasted like spring on a plate. I had worn my cream dress, low heels, and the pearl earrings Daniel gave me years ago when he still remembered Mother's Day without being reminded. For one foolish moment, I thought this Easter might be different. Then I heard Allison laugh. It was not a loud laugh. That would have been kinder. It was soft, polished, the kind of laugh people use when they want cruelty to sound like good manners. Honestly, she said, I invited Margaret because Daniel would feel guilty otherwise. She's like a ghost haunting every family holiday. The table went quiet for half a second. Then someone gave a nervous chuckle. I stood very still. The bakery box pressed against my ribs. Through the glass, I could see the back of Daniel's navy blazer. My son sat beside his wife with a mimosa in his hand, looking down into the orange juice and champagne as if the answer to his weakness might be floating there. He heard her. I knew he heard her because his shoulders tightened. But he did not turn around. He did not say, "That's my mother." He did not even clear his throat. Allison continued, her voice bright and easy. She means well, I guess, but she has no idea how exhausting she is. Every holiday becomes about managing her feelings. I looked down at the cake in my hands. I had zest 3 lemons for it. I had wrapped it carefully so the glaze would not stick to the lid. I had imagined Emily, my 12-year-old granddaughter, smiling when she saw it because she used to ask for an extra slice to take home in a napkin. That was before Allison started saying sugar made children moody, and before Daniel started repeating whatever Allison said like it had been printed in a medical journal. I could have turned around and left. I could have walked back to my car, driven home, and eaten Easter dinner alone at my kitchen table. But something about Daniel's silence held me in place longer than Allison's words did. A daughter-in-law can dislike you. A stranger can misjudge you. But a son knows where the bones of his childhood are buried. He knows who packed his lunches, who sat beside him through fevers, who paid for baseball cleats when money was tight, who stayed up waiting when he learned to drive. Daniel knew all of that. And still, he sat there while his wife made me sound like an inconvenience wearing pearls. I took one slow breath. Then another. The restaurant smelled of coffee, butter, tulips, and expensive perfume. Families were gathering around white linen tables, children in pastel dresses and little bow ties, grandparents posing for pictures under a garland of paper lilies. Everything looked warm. Everything looked holy. And behind that pretty glass wall, my place in the family had just been explained to me. Not by accident. Not in anger. Casually. Like a menu item no one wanted to order. I stepped around the divider and walked toward the table. Allison saw me first. Her smile froze so quickly it almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Daniel looked up and for 1 second, he was 12 again, caught doing something he knew was wrong. Emily's eyes widened. The others shifted in their chairs. No one spoke. I set the lemon pound cake in the center of the table, right between the tulips and the basket of warm rolls. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Allison opened her mouth, probably to explain, probably to wrap the ugliness in tissue paper and call it a misunderstanding. I did not give her the chance. I smiled the same small smile I used when a student lied to me back when I taught 3rd grade and thought I had not noticed the crumpled homework in his sleeve. "Happy Easter, everyone," I said. My voice was calm enough to make the whole table uncomfortable. Then I pulled out the chair at the very end, the only empty seat left, the one closest to the hallway and farthest from my son, and I sat down as if I had not just heard exactly how much I was hated. The chair at the end of the table had not been meant for me. I understood that the moment I sat down. The place setting was complete, technically. There was a folded napkin, a water glass, a salad fork, and a small printed menu tucked beneath the silverware. But the menu did not say Margaret Whittaker like the others did. It said Maggie. I stared at that name for a moment longer than I should have. Allison knew I did not use it. Henry had called me Margaret for 46 years, even when we were young and everyone else tried to shorten me into something smaller. A woman should get to keep the name she answers to, he used to say. I touched the edge of the menu with one finger, then left it where it was. Across the table, Allison was recovering quickly. She always did. Her face softened into concern, as if I had arrived late to a conversation she had been having lovingly in my honor. Margaret, she said, drawing out my name like a ribbon she was trying to smooth. I did not realize you were standing there. That was the first honest thing she had said all morning. Daniel shifted in his chair. He looked at me, then at the cake, then at his wife. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Emily sat beside him in a pale lavender dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked at me the way children look at adults when they know something is wrong but have been trained not to name it. I gave her a small smile. She tried to smile back, but Allison placed one manicured hand lightly over Emily's wrist. Not hard. Not dramatic. Just enough. The kind of gesture people miss if they are not used to being managed. The brunch table was beautiful. That was the worst part. Yellow tulips stood in a glass vase at the center, arranged with sprigs of baby's breath and white ribbon. Small chocolate eggs had been placed beside each plate. Sunlight poured through tall windows, spilling over the linen tablecloth and catching in the rims of champagne flutes. From the kitchen came the smell of toasted brioche, maple bacon, and coffee. A server moved between tables with silver pots and a practiced smile. Everything around us suggested warmth, forgiveness, family. But at our table, the air had gone thin. Allison lifted her mimosa and laughed again, softer this time. Well, now that we are all here, let us not make the morning awkward. I looked at Daniel then. Not sharply. I simply looked at him. He was 42 years old, with Henry's dark hair and my mother's eyes. When he was little, he used to reach for my hand in parking lots without thinking. Now his hands stayed wrapped around his glass. Mom, he said finally, we were just talking. You know how Allison is. She jokes when she is nervous. Allison turned her head toward him very slowly. The look she gave him was polite, but it landed like a warning. Daniel lowered his eyes again. I placed my napkin across my lap. Of course, I said. A joke. No one believed me. That made it easier. The waiter came to take our orders, and everyone became suddenly fascinated by Eggs Benedict, smoked salmon, and fruit bowls. I ordered black coffee and the vegetable quiche. Allison ordered for Emily without asking her. Daniel ordered nothing at first, then copied Allison's choice after she glanced at him. I watched all of this quietly. I had spent years telling myself their marriage was simply different from mine, that modern couples had their own rhythms, that a mother should not interfere. But sitting there at the far end of a table dressed up for Easter, I began to see the shape of things. I was not being included. I was being displayed. Brought in late, seated far away, renamed on paper, corrected with smiles, tolerated in public, blamed in private. The lemon pound cake sat untouched in the middle of the table. Its glaze had settled perfectly over the top, shining under the restaurant lights. I had made it because I still believed food could carry love across a distance words could not cross. But Allison looked at it as though I had placed an old habit on her clean table. That was sweet of you, she said. Though we did already order dessert. Sweet of me. Not thoughtful. Not welcome. Sweet, in the way people describe something unnecessary but harmless. Emily looked at the cake and whispered, I like Grandma's lemon cake. Allison's smile did not move, but her eyes changed. We will see, sweetheart, she said. You have had a lot of sugar this weekend. Emily's face closed like a little door. I took one sip of coffee. It was hot enough to sting my tongue, and I was grateful for the pain because it gave me something simple to focus on. Around us, other families laughed. Forks touched plates. A baby squealed 2 tables over. Someone's grandfather posed for a picture wearing bunny ears, and the whole room clapped. I sat in the middle of all that happiness and felt the outline of my absence inside my own family. Not a loud absence. A carefully arranged one. The kind that still leaves a chair, just not a place. The food arrived on white plates that looked too large for what they held. My quiche sat in front of me with a small pile of greens dressed so lightly they seemed decorative rather than edible. Daniel's plate matched Allison's exactly, down to the side of fruit he would not eat because he had disliked cantaloupe since he was 7. I noticed that and almost smiled. A mother remembers the small things even when everyone else has decided her memory is a burden. For a while, the conversation moved around me like a polite stream finding its way around a stone. Allison spoke about the spring fundraiser at Emily's school, the new patio furniture she and Daniel had ordered, and a couple they knew from church who had just bought a beach house near Kiowa Island. Every few sentences, she included me with a glance that was not really an invitation. Margaret, you remember how exhausting school events can be. Margaret, you probably would not enjoy all the traffic out there now. Margaret, you always liked things simpler. Simpler. Older. Smaller. Easier to move aside. I cut my quiche into neat squares and let her talk. Then Allison tapped her spoon gently against her water glass. It was not enough to make a true ringing sound, but it gathered attention anyway because she had trained this family to turn toward her. Before dessert, she said brightly, I thought we could do something meaningful. Easter is about renewal, after all. New beginnings. Letting go of what does not serve the family anymore. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Emily looked down at her lap. The others at the table smiled cautiously, unsure whether this was a prayer, a game, or one of Allison's little lessons dressed up as tradition. I placed my fork on the edge of my plate. Very straight. Very quiet. Allison reached into her handbag and pulled out a stack of small cream-colored cards tied with twine. Of course, she had prepared them. Cruelty, when polished long enough, can pass for organization. I wrote a prompt for everyone, she said. Just something to reflect on. One thing we are ready to release so our family can be healthier. She handed the cards around the table. When she reached me, her fingers brushed mine, cool and careful. My card read, in gold ink, "What burden are you ready to put down?" I looked at the word burden until the letters stopped looking like letters. Henry used to say Easter was the one holiday that reminded him people could come back from hard winters. That morning, I wondered if some winters were not seasons at all, but houses you kept being invited into. Allison went first. She stood, though no one had asked her to. The sunlight caught her blonde hair and made her look almost angelic. That was one of her gifts, looking soft while sharpening the room. I will start, she said. This year, I want to let go of guilt. She paused, letting the word settle. Especially the kind of guilt older parents place on their adult children when they cannot accept that life has moved forward. No one breathed for a moment. I did not move. Allison kept her eyes on me now, no longer pretending this was general. I think sometimes love becomes control. Sometimes concern becomes manipulation. And sometimes a family has to be brave enough to stop letting one person's loneliness dictate everyone else's happiness. A tiny sound came from Emily, not quite a gasp. Daniel whispered Allison, but it had no strength in it. It was the sound of a man tapping the brakes after the car had already rolled downhill. Allison turned toward him with a gentle smile. What? I am being honest. That is what healthy families do. Healthy. The word sat there between the tulips and the untouched cake. I thought of the voice I had heard behind the glass. I thought of my name printed wrong on the menu. I thought of Emily's wrist beneath Allison's hand. And I understood then that this was not a brunch. It was a trial. I had not been invited as a guest. I had been summoned as the accused. Someone near the middle of the table gave a soft, uncomfortable laugh and reached for his coffee. Another person suddenly became interested in buttering a biscuit. Their discomfort did not protect me. It only protected them from having to choose. Daniel looked at me at last. His face was pale with embarrassment, not for what had been said, but because it had been said out loud where he could not pretend not to notice. That distinction mattered. It hurt more than I expected. Allison sat down, satisfied, and picked up her mimosa as if she had offered a blessing. Your turn, Margaret, she said. Her tone was sweet enough to frost a cake. I looked at the card again. What burden are you ready to put down? For a second, the old part of me tried to rise. The peacemaker. The mother. The widow who did not want to ruin Easter. That part of me wanted to smile, say something harmless, and make everyone comfortable again. But then I saw Emily watching me with wet eyes, learning from the adults around her what a woman was supposed to swallow in order to be loved. I folded the card once. Then again. I placed it beside my plate. "I am still deciding," I said. My voice was not loud, but it traveled. Allison blinked. Daniel looked down. And for the first time that morning, the silence at the table belonged to me. Allison moved on after that, but the table did not recover. Conversations restarted in careful little pieces, like dishes being swept up after they had already cracked. Someone asked about Daniel's work. Someone else mentioned the weather, saying Charleston had been lucky to avoid heavy rain that weekend. Emily pushed fruit around her plate with the side of her fork. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and felt the past begin to arrange itself in my mind, not as memories usually come, soft and scattered, but as evidence. The first Christmas after Henry died, Daniel had promised me I would not be alone. He said he would bring Allison and Emily over by noon, and I spent 2 days cooking because I still believed a full table could keep grief from swallowing a room. Turkey, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, Parker house rolls, pecan pie. At 11:30 that morning, Allison texted that Emily had woken up tired and they needed a quiet day at home. I understood. I packed leftovers into containers for them anyway. 2 days later, I saw photos online of Allison's parents sitting at their dining room table with Daniel carving a ham behind them. Emily wore the red dress I had bought her. I told myself they must have stopped by briefly. I told myself not to make pain out of coincidence. Then there was Emily's school concert in February. I had bought a new cardigan for it, pale blue, because Emily once said I looked like a storybook grandmother in blue. Allison told me the program started at 7:30. I arrived at 7:10, early enough to find parking, or so I thought. The auditorium doors were already open, and parents were filing out with flowers in their hands. The concert had started at 6. Emily found me near the lobby and hugged me so tightly I could feel her little shoulders shaking. "I looked for you," she whispered. Allison laughed from behind her and said, "Oh, Margaret, I am sure I told you 6. You know how messages get mixed up." Daniel was there too, holding Emily's coat. He gave me that helpless look I had come to know too well, the one that asked me to forgive him before he had to speak. I did. That was my mistake. I forgave silence so many times it learned to dress itself as peace. At Thanksgiving, Allison asked me not to bring my cornbread dressing because she wanted a more modern menu. I brought flowers instead. She placed them in the laundry room because, she said, the scent might bother her guests. At Emily's 10th birthday party, I arrived with a handmade quilt I had worked on for 3 months, each square stitched from fabric saved from Daniel's childhood shirts and Henry's old flannel. Allison thanked me in front of everyone, then set it aside under the gift table. Later, I found it still folded in the back of Daniel's car, underneath a bag of paper plates. He said they had meant to bring it inside and forgot. Forgot. That word had become a closet where my family stored every small cruelty they did not want to name. Sitting at the Easter table, I realized Allison had not erased me all at once. She had done it carefully, with calendar changes, seating arrangements, wrong names, returned dishes, shortened visits, and jokes no one challenged. She operated in the spaces where politeness made people cowardly. She never had to slam a door if she could simply convince everyone I should stand outside it. And Daniel, my Daniel, had let her. Perhaps not because he hated me. That might have been easier to understand. He let her because opposing her would cost him comfort, and he had mistaken comfort for happiness. I looked across the table at him. He was laughing too loudly at something his cousin said, trying to make the morning feel normal again. His wedding ring flashed when he lifted his coffee cup. Henry's watch was on his wrist. I had given it to him after the funeral, thinking a son should carry something of his father. Henry had worn that watch every Sunday, every anniversary, every Easter morning when he stood beside me in church and squeezed my hand during the hymns. Seeing it on Daniel now felt strange, like a good man's memory had been placed on a weak man's arm. I did not hate my son in that moment. That would come later, perhaps, or perhaps it never would. What I felt was colder, clearer. I saw him without the fog of motherhood softening the edges. I saw a grown man choosing the easiest chair at every table, even when that chair was built from someone else's humiliation. Allison's voice pulled me back. She was telling the table how grateful she was for fresh starts and healthy boundaries. I watched her smile, perfect and practiced. Then I looked at my lemon pound cake, still untouched, still shining under the soft restaurant lights. I had brought sweetness into a room that had already decided I tasted bitter. For the first time in years, I did not wonder how to fix it. I wondered why I had ever believed it was my job. The server returned with dessert menus before anyone had touched the cake I brought. She was young, maybe 22, with a neat ponytail and a smile that had not yet learned how much tension can sit at one family table. "Would anyone like to hear the specials?" she asked. Allison answered before anyone else could. "Yes, please, and we will probably skip the cake in the middle." It was a sweet gesture, but we already planned something. The server glanced at the pound cake, then at me, and for one uncomfortable second I saw pity pass across her face. Pity is a small thing, but it can feel heavy when it comes from a stranger. "Of course," she said softly. "I can box it back up for you later." Allison smiled as if she had solved a problem. "That would be perfect." Emily looked up quickly. "Could we at least have one slice?" Her voice was small, but it carried. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Your mom said we already ordered dessert." "But Grandma made it," Emily said. There it was. The simplest defense in the world. Not dramatic. Not clever. Just true. Grandma made it. Allison's face stayed pleasant, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Sweetheart, do not argue at the table." Emily's cheeks flushed. She stared down at her lap, and I felt something in me shift. I had swallowed insult after insult that morning because I knew how to survive a room. But watching a child learn to swallow truth for the comfort of adults was different. Allison reached beside her chair and lifted a pale pink gift bag decorated with tiny white rabbits. "Actually," she said, brightening her voice, "I have something for Margaret before dessert. Since Easter is about renewal, I thought this might be meaningful." The bag came down the table from hand to hand, passing over plates, coffee cups, and folded napkins until it reached me. It was light. Too light to be a real gift. I looked at Daniel. He would not meet my eyes. That told me he knew enough to be ashamed, but not enough to stop it. I pulled out a book wrapped in tissue paper. The cover was pastel green with a peaceful-looking woman standing on a beach. The title read, "Learning to Let Go: How Loving Parents Can Stop Smothering Their Adult Children." No one spoke. Even the restaurant noise seemed to move farther away. I opened the cover because some part of me still needed to see how far Allison was willing to go. Inside, taped neatly to the first page, was a card in her looping handwriting. "For when loving becomes smothering." My thumb rested on the edge of that sentence. I did not feel heat rush to my face. I did not feel tears. What I felt was recognition. This was not a thoughtless gift bought in a hurry. This was planned. Wrapped. Carried into Easter brunch like a little ceremonial knife made of paper and ribbon. Allison tilted her head. "I hope you receive it in the spirit intended." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her pearl bracelet, her perfect manicure, the soft pink lipstick, the careful innocence on her face. She had mistaken gentleness for weakness, because gentleness had allowed her to win for a long time. "And what spirit was that?" I asked. My question landed cleanly. Allison blinked. Daniel's cousin coughed into his napkin. The server, who had been approaching with a coffee pot, turned silently toward another table. Allison gave a small laugh. "Personal growth, of course." "For me," I said. "Yes," she replied. "For all of us, really. But especially for patterns that have become unhealthy." Emily's chair scraped slightly. She looked at me, then at her mother. Her lower lip trembled. "Mom," she whispered, "please stop." Allison's head turned. "Emily." Just one word, but it carried enough warning to bend the child's shoulders. I closed the book gently and set it beside my plate. Then I reached for the gift bag, folded the tissue paper, and placed it back inside with careful hands. Every movement gave me time to decide who I wanted to be in that moment. The wounded mother who defended herself. The polite grandmother who pretended not to understand. The old widow everyone expected to retreat quietly and make excuses for them later. None of those women felt like me anymore. I looked at the pink bag, then at the wrong name on my menu, then at the card I had folded beside my plate. Maggie. Burden. Smothering. 3 little labels placed in front of me by people who still expected access to my love, my time, my money, my forgiveness. I had come that morning with more than cake. In my purse was a cream envelope containing a cashier's check for $50,000, money I had planned to give Daniel and Allison toward the down payment on the larger house they said they needed near Emily's school. I had not told them yet. I wanted it to be an Easter surprise. Henry and I had saved carefully all our lives, and after he passed, I told myself helping Daniel was a way to keep Henry's generosity alive. But as I sat there with Allison's gift beside my plate, I realized generosity offered to the wrong hands does not become love. It becomes permission. Allison raised her glass. To healthier boundaries, she said. A few people lifted their glasses halfway, trapped between manners and shame. I did not lift mine. I placed one hand on my purse instead, feeling the outline of the envelope inside. Then I smiled, not for Allison, not for Daniel, but for the woman I had been before I forgot she deserved protection too. The toast hung in the air without finding a place to land. Allison held her glass a little higher than everyone else, smiling as if she had just guided us through a healing moment instead of arranging a public humiliation. Around the table, people lifted their drinks because manners are sometimes the coward's costume. Daniel lifted his too. Not all the way. Just enough to show Allison he was still with her, and enough to show me he was not with me. I watched his hand tremble slightly, and for a brief second I remembered that same hand, small and sticky with orange popsicle juice, reaching for mine outside a grocery store in July. A mother's memory is a strange punishment. It brings back the child while the man is failing you. I did not lift my glass. I kept my hand on my purse, touching the edge of the envelope through the leather, feeling the shape of the $50,000 I had almost given away to people who thought kindness was something they could collect without respecting where it came from. Allison noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes dropped to my hand, then returned to my face. Margaret, she said, still smiling, you do not have to participate if this feels uncomfortable. Growth often does. There were a dozen answers I could have given her. Sharp ones. Honest ones. Answers that would have made the whole table lean back. Instead, before I could speak, Emily did. Mom, stop it. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the clinking silverware and soft restaurant music better than any shout could have. Allison turned slowly toward her daughter. Emily, we talked about interrupting adults. Emily's eyes filled, but she did not look away. You said Grandma would ruin Easter if she came. The table went still. Not quiet. Still. Even Daniel stopped breathing for a second. Allison's smile remained, but the person behind it disappeared. Sweetheart, she said, each syllable careful, that is not what I said. Emily shook her head. Yes, it is. You said Dad only invites her because he feels sorry for her. You said if I sat next to her, she would make me feel guilty for growing up. My heart seemed to fold in on itself. Not because of Allison. I had already understood Allison. It was Emily's face that broke something open in me. She looked ashamed for telling the truth, as if honesty were a stain she had made on the tablecloth. I reached across the corner of the table, slowly enough that Allison could not call it dramatic, and placed my hand palm up near Emily's plate. I did not grab. I did not insist. I just offered. After a moment, Emily put her small hand in mine. Her fingers were cold. Thank you for telling me the truth, sweetheart, I said. My voice stayed calm, though something inside me was shaking. Allison let out a soft laugh, too quick and too high. This is exactly what I mean. You see? This is the emotional pressure I am talking about. Now Emily feels responsible for your feelings. I looked at my granddaughter. Emily is not responsible for my feelings. Then I looked at Daniel. Adults are responsible for what they allow at their own table. Daniel flinched. It was small, but I saw it. He set his glass down, and a drop of mimosa slid along the outside, leaving a bright trail on the white linen. Mom, he said, Let us not do this here. There it was again. Not stop hurting her, Allison. Not Emily should not be put in the middle. Not I am sorry. Just let us not do this here. As if the problem was location. As if humiliation became acceptable when it was wrapped in tulips and served with brunch. I pulled my hand back gently from Emily's and placed it in my lap. Where would you prefer it, Daniel? I asked. Christmas? Her graduation? My funeral? His face went pale. Allison's eyes flashed, but she recovered with impressive speed. That is an awful thing to say. It is, I agreed. So was everything said before I sat down. A cousin near the middle of the table murmured, maybe we should all take a breath. I almost laughed, but I did not. People always suggest breathing when they have no intention of standing up for anyone. Emily wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Grandma, I wanted to sit by you, she said. I asked, but Mom said it would make things weird. I nodded once. I know. And I did know. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. The careful moving of chairs. The soft correction of affection. The quiet training of a child to believe loving her grandmother was disloyal to her mother. Allison leaned toward Emily, her voice low and polished. Honey, you are confused. That was when something in me became perfectly clear. Not angry. Not loud. Clear. I had heard that phrase before. Allison used confusion the way some people use curtains, pulling it over whatever she did not want seen. I was confused about the concert time. I was confused about Christmas plans. I was confused about what Daniel meant. I was confused about whether she had insulted me or simply joked. Now Emily was confused too. The word had traveled from me to my granddaughter, and I could not let it settle there. I reached into my purse and took out the cream envelope. Daniel noticed it immediately. His eyes moved to Allison, then back to me. Mom, what is that? He asked. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of what it had almost been. A gift. A bridge. One more attempt to buy my way back into a family that kept billing me for love. It was something I brought for you and Allison, I said. Allison's expression changed before she could stop it. Interest first. Then calculation. For us? She asked. I nodded. For the house near Emily's school. Daniel's mouth opened. He knew. Maybe not the exact amount, but he knew enough. Allison sat straighter. For the first time all morning, she looked at me as if I were not an old inconvenience, but a locked door that might still open. I slipped the envelope back into my purse. But I can see now this family has already decided what I am worth. No one spoke. The untouched cake sat between us, sweet and useless. Emily looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. I smiled at her gently this time. Do not worry, sweetheart, I said. Truth never ruins a family. It only shows what has already been broken. Daniel's question still hung between us after the envelope disappeared back into my purse. Mom, he said again, softer this time, how much was it? I looked at him for a long moment. Not because I wanted to punish him with silence, but because I wanted him to hear the question he had chosen to ask first. Not are you all right? Not what did you hear? Not why did my daughter feel afraid to tell the truth? Just how much was it? Allison touched his arm beneath the table, but this time I saw uncertainty in her face. Money has a way of revealing people faster than pain does. Enough, I said. Daniel swallowed. Enough for what? I folded my napkin once and placed it beside my plate. Enough to help with the down payment. Enough to make the new house easier. Enough that you and Allison would have called it a blessing if it had come with no memory attached. Allison's cheeks colored faintly. That is unfair. I turned toward her. No, Allison. Unfair is inviting a woman to Easter brunch so you can teach her granddaughter to be embarrassed by loving her. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out cleanly. That was new. For years, Allison had lived inside perfect sentences. She always had a polished explanation, a softened accusation, a little smile to make ugliness look reasonable. Now the room had become too honest for her usual language. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, please, can we talk about this later? We have been talking about it later for years, I said. Every missed concert. Every changed dinner time. Every holiday where I was told I misunderstood. Later became the place where your courage went to disappear. His face tightened as if I had raised my voice. I had not. That was the thing about truth spoken calmly. It gives people no storm to blame. Allison set down her glass. I think this has become very emotional. It became emotional when you brought a book to humiliate me in front of my family. That was not my intention. I picked up the book and read the title aloud, slowly enough for every word to sit at the table. Learning to let go, how loving parents can stop smothering their adult children. Then I opened the cover and read the card. For when loving becomes smothering. I closed it gently. What intention would you like me to find in that? No one answered. A few tables nearby had started to notice us, not because we were loud, but because silence can draw attention when it is heavy enough. The server stood near the host station pretending to check receipts. Emily's hand was in her lap again, small and clenched. I wanted to take her with me. I wanted to wrap her in a coat and drive her away from that table, from that careful house, from the confusion Allison kept pouring over her like syrup. But I knew children are not rescued by scenes that give controlling people better stories to tell later. Emily needed to see something else. Not panic. Not begging. Not a grandmother broken open in public. She needed to see a woman leave with her name intact. I reached for my purse and stood. My chair made a soft sound against the floor, barely more than a whisper, but every face turned toward me. Allison rose halfway, alarmed now that the performance had moved beyond her control. Margaret, do not make a scene. I looked at her, then at the table she had arranged, the wrong menu, the untouched cake, the gift bag, the tulips standing bright and innocent in the middle of it all. I am not making one, I said. I am ending one. Daniel stood too quickly, knocking his knee against the table. Coffee rippled in a cup. Mom, wait. The word almost worked. For half a second, I heard the boy in it. The boy who used to call from the top of the stairs when he was afraid of thunderstorms. The boy I would have crossed any room to comfort. But the man in front of me had watched his daughter cry and his mother be shamed, and only moved when Money began walking out the door. I softened my voice because I did not want cruelty to be the last thing Emily heard from me. Daniel, I waited for you all morning. His eyes reddened, but still he said nothing useful. Allison stepped closer, lowering her voice. Think carefully. If you walk out like this, people will talk. I almost smiled. Let them. For once, they will have heard enough to know why. I turned to Emily. Sweetheart, I love you. That has never been something you needed permission to receive. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. I left the book on the table. I took the cake. That surprised Allison most of all. Her eyes followed the white box as I lifted it with both hands. Maybe she thought I would leave it there as proof I had still come to serve them. But the cake was mine. The morning I spent making it was mine. The love inside it was mine. I would not leave sweetness on a table that had treated it like clutter. I walked past the frosted glass divider and into the front of the restaurant. Near the entrance, beside a tall vase of lilies, Grace Miller stood from a small two-person table. She had been waiting since I texted her from the restroom after hearing Allison behind the glass. Grace took one look at my face, then at the bakery box in my hands, and did not ask me to explain. Good friends know when explanations can wait. She simply picked up her purse and said, I parked right out front. Outside, the Charleston air was warm and smelled faintly of river water and blooming jasmine. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance. I placed the cake carefully on my lap when I got into Grace's car. Through the restaurant window, I could see Daniel standing at the table motionless, with Henry's watch on his wrist and regret arriving too late to be useful. Grace started the engine. Home, she asked. I looked down at the yellow ribbon around the cake box. For the first time that day, my hands began to tremble. Not from weakness. From release. Not yet, I said. Let us drive for a while. Grace drove without asking questions, which was one of the reasons I loved her. Some people see a trembling woman and rush to fill the silence with advice, but Grace had lived long enough to know that silence can be a room where dignity gathers itself again. We followed the curve of the Charleston streets, past pastel houses with black shutters, past porch swings and window boxes bright with spring flowers, past families walking out of churches in their Easter clothes. I held the cake box in my lap with both hands. The yellow ribbon had loosened a little. A thin line of glaze had touched the cardboard lid. For some reason, that nearly broke me. Not Allison's book. Not Daniel's question about the money. Not the wrong name on the menu. The glaze. The small evidence of effort, of a morning spent believing love would be welcomed if it arrived homemade and wrapped neatly. Grace turned onto a quiet street lined with live oaks. "Do you want to tell me now?" she asked. I looked out the window. She gave me a book about smothering adult children. Grace made a sound under her breath that was not quite a word. "And Daniel?" He asked how much money was in the envelope. Grace did not answer right away. That was kind of her. She gave the sentence room to become as ugly as it was. "I am sorry, Margaret." I nodded, but my throat tightened. I keep thinking about Henry. What he would have said. What he would have done. Grace slowed at a stop sign. "Henry would have pulled out your chair, picked up that cake, and taken you somewhere decent." I laughed once softly because she was right. Henry had been gentle, but he was never weak. There is a difference, and I had forgotten it while making excuses for Daniel. We drove to the Battery and parked where the water opened wide and bright under the afternoon sun. Grace and I sat on a bench facing the harbor. I placed the cake between us. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. A little boy in a seersucker jacket chased Bubbles along the walkway while his father tried to take pictures. Two women walked past carrying lilies wrapped in brown paper. The world kept being beautiful in that unfair way it has, even when your private life has cracked down the middle. Finally, I opened my purse and took out the cream envelope. The cashier's check was still inside, clean and flat. $50,000. I had gone to the bank on Friday, thinking of Daniel's relieved face, Allison's surprised gratitude, Emily's future bedroom with morning light. I had imagined saying, "Your father," and I always wanted to help when it mattered. I had imagined Daniel hugging me. Not out of obligation. Not because Allison was watching. Just because he remembered I was his mother. I slid the check halfway out, then back in. Grace glanced at it, but did not ask. "I was going to give it to them today," I said. "I know." I looked at her. "How?" "Because you bake when you are hoping too hard." That made me smile, though my eyes burned. Grace had known me for 30 years. She had sat beside me at Henry's funeral, brought soup when my knees acted up, and called every Sunday evening because she said widows should not have to hear the house settle alone. "What do I do now?" I asked. Grace folded her hands over her purse. "You stop paying admission to be mistreated." The words were simple. No drama. No thunder. Just a door opening. That evening, after Grace brought me home, I placed the cake on my kitchen counter and stood in the quiet house Henry and I had bought when Daniel was in middle school. The late sun stretched across the hardwood floor. His reading chair still sat near the window, though no one had read in it for 2 years. I made coffee. I cut one slice of lemon pound cake and put it on a china plate with a blue rim. Then I sat at the table and ate it slowly. It was good. Moist, bright, just enough lemon. I had needed someone to say that all day, so I said it myself. Afterward, I took out a sheet of stationery from the drawer where I kept stamps, thank you notes, and old birthday candles. I wrote Daniel's name at the top. For a long time, that was all I wrote. Then the words came, not angry, not pleading. Clear. I told him I loved him. I told him I had heard Allison before I entered the dining room. I told him I had watched him choose silence, and that silence had finally taught me something his words never could. I told him the financial gift I had planned was no longer available. I would not help purchase a larger house for a family that made my granddaughter afraid to love me openly. I would not contribute to vacations I was mocked for attending, holidays I was invited to as a burden, or renovations for a home where my name was treated like an inconvenience. I paused there, listening to the refrigerator hum. My hand did not shake anymore. I added that Emily would still be protected, but differently. I would be speaking with my attorney about setting up an education fund in her name, one that neither Daniel nor Allison could touch, one she could access when she became an adult. Then I wrote the hardest sentence. Until you can speak to me as a son instead of a husband managing a problem, I need distance. I signed it Margaret. Not Mom. Not Maggie. Margaret. Then I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and set it beside my keys for the morning. My phone had 7 missed calls from Daniel and 3 messages from Allison. I did not open them. For years, I had treated every call like a summons. That night, I let the phone go dark. The house was quiet, but it did not feel empty. It felt like it was waiting to see what kind of woman I would become now that I had stopped asking for a place at the wrong table. Daniel came to my house 3 days later, alone. I saw his car from the kitchen window before he knocked, and for a moment my body reacted before my mind did. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. I checked my hair in the dark reflection of the microwave. I almost became the mother who rushed to make coffee, cut cake, smooth the air, and protect her son from the discomfort he had brought with him. Then I stopped. I folded the towel over the sink and waited for the knock. When it came, I let it sound twice before I opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch wearing the same navy blazer from Easter, though now it looked wrinkled at the cuffs. He had Henry's watch on again. His eyes moved over my face as if searching for the version of me who would make this easy. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stepped aside. "Daniel." He came in slowly, looking around the living room like a guest instead of the boy who had once left toy trucks under my sofa. I did not offer coffee. That small omission seemed to unsettle him more than I expected. He stood near Henry's reading chair and pushed his hands into his pockets. "I got your letter." I nodded. "I assumed you did. Allison thinks it was harsh." There it was. Her name arriving before his apology. I looked at him until he heard it too. His shoulders dropped. "I am sorry," he said. "That came out wrong. A great deal came out wrong on Sunday." He closed his eyes briefly. "I know." The words were quiet, but this time they did not sound like a performance. He sat on the edge of the sofa without being invited, then seemed to realize it and stood again. "I should have said something. At the restaurant. Before the restaurant. Years ago." I did not rescue him from the sentence. I let it stand there and look at him. "Yes," I said. His face tightened. I kept telling myself I was keeping peace. "You were keeping comfort," I said. "There is a difference." He looked toward the window, where the camellias Henry planted were blooming late that year. "Emily has barely spoken to Allison since brunch." My heart ached, but I kept my voice even. "Emily told the truth. Children should not be punished for that." "I know." He rubbed both hands over his face. "I am trying to fix things." "With Allison?" "With everyone." I sat in the armchair across from him, the one Henry used to call my thinking chair. "Daniel, fixing things does not begin with asking me to return to the table that taught my granddaughter to pity me." He nodded slowly. "I am not asking for that." I waited. He took a breath. "I came to say I am sorry. Not for the money. Not because of the house. I mean, I would be lying if I said that did not shock us, but that is not why I am here." I watched him carefully. Motherhood makes hope dangerous. It rises even when you know better. "Why are you here?" I asked. His eyes filled, but he did not look away. "Because when you walked out, Emily asked me why I never defend you. And I did not have an answer that I could live with." That was the first honest thing my son had said in a long time. Not enough to erase the hurt. Enough to mark the place where truth had finally entered the room. I stood and walked to the secretary desk by the wall. From the top drawer, I took a small card. On it was the name of my attorney, the same man who had helped settle Henry's estate. "I have an appointment Friday," I said. "The education fund for Emily will be created in her name only. No parent access. No exceptions." Daniel nodded. "That is fair. The lake cottage will remain mine." He looked surprised, then ashamed of being surprised. Allison thought. I know what Allison thought. I handed him the card. "This is not punishment. This is protection. Mine and Emily's." He held the card with both hands. "Can Emily still see you?" The question softened something in me, but not all the way. When she wants to, and when it can happen without making her feel disloyal to her mother. Daniel nodded again. "I will make sure of that." "No," I said gently. "You will prove that." He looked at me then, really looked, as if he was meeting someone who had been hidden beneath the word mom all his life. A woman with a name. A house. A will. A boundary. A future. When he left, he hugged me at the door. I allowed it. I even held him for a second. But I did not pretend everything was healed because an apology had finally arrived. Some wounds do not need to stay open, but they do need to be remembered correctly. A week later, I hosted Sunday lunch at my own table. Grace came with a bouquet of yellow tulips. Emily came with Daniel, carrying a small paper bag from a bakery because she said she wanted to bring dessert this time. Allison did not come. No one said her name. I set the table with blue-rimmed china, polished forks, cloth napkins, and little place cards written in my own hand. Grace Miller. Emily Whitaker. Daniel Whitaker. Margaret Whitaker. Emily picked up my card and smiled. You wrote your full name, Grandma. I looked at it. Black ink on thick white paper, simple and correct. Yes, I said. I did. We ate lemon cake after lunch, not because anyone had to, but because everyone wanted a slice. Emily sat beside me. Daniel helped clear the plates without being asked. Grace told a funny story about Henry trying to repair a screen door and somehow making it worse. For the first time in years, I did not listen for what was missing. I did not wait for permission to belong. Sunlight moved across the table. The house smelled of coffee, lemon, and clean linen. My family was smaller than I once hoped it would be, but it was honest at that table. And I had learned something that Easter finally made impossible to forget. Love does not require you to shrink until you fit inside someone else's comfort. Sometimes the holiest thing a woman can do is pick up the sweetness she brought, walk away from the wrong table, and set a new place for herself at home.